Well, welcome everyone. Really nice to see so many people of you in this virtual room. My name is Steffen Boehm. I'm a Professor of Organization and Sustainability at the University of Exeter, based in the Southwest in the UK. Martina, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Martina Linnenluecke. I'm a professor at UTS Business School at the University of Technology in Sydney, and I'm heading up the Center for Climate Risk and Resilience, and I'm co-editor for this section here of JBE as well. So it's great to see everyone today. Thanks for joining us.
Indeed. Thank you for joining, everyone. And what we have planned is basically to give a bit of a talk. We're planning not to talk for longer than 25 30 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A. If during our chat, as Martina already said, if during our presentation you have any questions or comments, please use the chat. If you want to then ask a question later, please raise your hands, use the virtual raise hand button on Zoom. So I think we'll just get underway. The main purpose of this is to essentially introduce a specific JBE section, JBE being Journal of Business Ethics, of course. And as you might know, JBE is organized, as it were, along the lines of quite a few different sections, and we have different section editors. Other journals call them associate editors, etc. So at JBE, we have section editors, and our section is called Environment and Business Ethics. So Martina and I are editing this particular section, and we want to essentially give you an insight into our role into the section and what kind of material we are hoping to receive. So to start us off with, the first thing to say is that the term environment is used in the wider realms of business studies in a variety of different ways. We are particularly interested in the relationship of humans, organizations, and businesses to the natural environment. And given that many of us are sitting right now in offices or at home, or many of us live lives that are quite disconnected from the natural environment, I invite you for just 1 minute to close your eyes to imagine what the natural environment actually is about. So you don't have to do it, but please, may I invite you to close your eyes and just think about the natural environment. Think about the birds, think about the soil, think about all the non-humans out there, think about the atmosphere, think about the biosphere in general, think about geology, think about all the natural environment that you can think of right now. Of course, we are not talking about humans being somehow separate from the natural environment. We are part of nature, right? And that relationship is, of course, one key thing that we are interested in, how humans connect to the natural environment. So you can open your eyes again. And this normally requires systems perspectives, right? We are interested in a wider systems perspective of how humans relate to the natural environment. And here, of course, particularly ethical perspectives of how business in particular links to the natural environment. And as I said in one of the editorials recently, here business is again not seen as separate from the natural environment. Business is part of the natural environment, right? So we really need to go beyond dichotomous understandings of us humans, the supposedly superior species versus everyone else out there. Okay, so there's a link. We can share the slides later. In fact, the recordings we can share as well. So there's a link to a recent editorial where we talk a little bit about this. This is a general advice, some general recommendation for you to read recent editorials of the journal. Journals continuously evolve. They never stay the same. Read the recent editorials written by the current editors who are basically using these editorials to outline what kind of material they're looking for. What do you think, what they think are pressing issues, what's the kind of methodologies they'd like to see, etc., etc. So if you plan to publish in JBE, read the journal in general, of course, recent papers, and particularly recent editorials. So one thing that, of course, has happened, and one key issue that we are highlighting in this section, is that for at least the last 250 years, humans have had a disproportionate impact on the natural environment. Sometimes this is called the Anthropocene, right? So there's still debates about how we call this, but essentially the term Anthropocene means that humans are now having a very, very large geology changing impact on the natural environment, right? And there are other terms that are discussed in the literature, for example, planetary boundaries, where systems modelers are trying to understand how the wider Earth system has changed due to human activity, right? So the role of humans and business in particular is already and has for some time altered the Earth system, okay? So what is the role of ethics, in particular business ethics, to understand this, right? Should human beings alter the Earth system beyond recognition? Should is normally a normative question, right? So that's one of the things we are interested in. One of these key Earth system changing dynamics that we are observing is, of course, climate change, and not just climate change, but more generally the environmental emergency that we are witnessing. Okay, droughts, flooding, extreme weather events is only the tip of the iceberg of some of these things that we are observing. Generally speaking, the environmental emergency, including climate change, it's not something that we can observe on a daily basis, and it's not affecting us on a daily basis, but we are seeing slow changes over long periods of time, which creates challenges for us to actually observe and analyze what's going on. Here we list some of these issues that are related to climate change in particular, which is, of course, one thing that we at JBE have discussed in the journal for a long time. JBE is one of the few business journals in general that has talked about climate change and has published papers on climate change for at least 20 years, if not longer, whereas most other journals only seem to be interested or have started to become interested over the last couple of years. Issues around climate justice are of importance to us. There are market dynamics emerging that try to deal with climate change issues, such as carbon markets, trading, and offsetting, which is something that we very much would welcome to see discussed in papers submitted to us. And there are also emerging inquiries into the role of low carbon technologies such as solar and wind, and the ethical issues around those. And the general gist of what we would welcome here is a realization that this transition to a low carbon economy is not one that is going without any tensions or trade-offs, right? So any transition, any change process will create winners and losers. There will always be tensions, there will be trade-offs, there will be issues to talk about, even as we move towards what are generally perceived to be good technological solutions, such as putting up a wind turbine or building a solar-powered array. One thing that we are very keen on is our debates that challenge anthropocentrism, which basically invites authors to critically reflect about human and non-human relations. So there's a whole array of ethical debates around non-human ethics animal-plant ethics, and generally speaking, what I think is very much needed, not just in business ethics, but management and business studies in general, is a broader drive towards decentering the human, right? If we take a systems approach, looking at humans within a broader Earth and biosphere system, we cannot put ourselves first always, right? So we need to decenter ourselves in some way or another, and a whole range of methodological approaches of how you can do that, right? So how do we understand business ethics within a decentered human system, as it were? We are also interested, going back to the role of humans, we are also interested not just in dominant human ways of life and livelihoods. So the academy, business academy in general, is still dominated by very Western, global North orientated debates on business ethics and business environment relationships. We are very much welcoming other ontologies and cosmologies, looking at how, for example, indigenous people live their lives, how land-based communities live their lives, and how business often has a fraught relationship with these communities who often haven't got a voice and who don't live Western livelihoods, right? So we're very much welcoming critical reflections of global South, global North relationships, and very much highlighting that other ontologies, other cosmologies, other ways of life exist, that we need to see them, and we need to give voice to these other ontologies. Many people talk about the rise of so-called green capitalism. There's a whole array of so-called nature-based solutions out there. Green growth is in everybody's mouth. So capitalism, as it were, is not short of green technologies and other green solutions that companies and governments are offering to transition us to a more sustainable future, right? We are all aware of a whole range of climate change technologies and as I said, nature-based solutions that are being implemented as we speak in the name of transitioning us to a greener, more sustainable future. Now, there are a whole range of ethical and governance implications of such approaches, which we welcome to be discussed in papers and manuscripts submitted to us, right? So, as I already said, these transitions are never without tension, without trade-offs, and there are clearly winners and losers in these transitions. And that's the purpose of this section, to reflect ethically about these transitions. And last but not least, before I hand over to Martina, land struggles are very much at the heart of this. So the land is something that is often not discussed in any business management organization studies kind of journal, right? You'd be hard pressed to find any meaningful debates on land-based issues in any of the mainstream business management journals. We would like to change that. JBE has published some papers in this regard, but many of these nature-based solutions, these green transition kind of solutions that are being talked about, actually involve the land, right? So if you build 1,000 wind turbines, they need to go somewhere. They take up lots of space. If you basically build huge solar wind farms on agricultural land, that might displace farmers or other food production, essentially land. Equally, if you feel you need to transition towards a biomass-based energy economy, right? So You might, in the UK, for example, Drax is the biggest power station that has transitioned from a coal-fired power station to a biomass fuel power station. This biomass has to come from somewhere. It has to grow somewhere, right? So there are land struggles, land issues involved. The land use is changing. There are competing interests between land-based communities and the demands of so-called natural capitalism. Okay, I'll stop here and hand over to Martina.
Thanks so much, Steffen. So as you've already heard from the introduction that Steffen has given us, a very key point of submitting to the Journal of Business Ethics is, as suggested in the journal title, right, the word ethics. And it's really a central element, or meant to be a central element in the submissions. And you can probably see that in the evolution of the journal as well. There has been a really strong turn towards ethics, in particular in recent years. And as Steffen already suggested, we definitely recommend to read the editorials that have been published by the current editors-in-chief as well. And they really outline what the journal essentially means by ethics theories, gives a couple of good examples as well. So, we do get a lot of submissions that cover really important topics, climate change, for instance, right? Or how to reduce emission, what we should be doing in order to embark on this journey towards a clean energy transition. But often the ethical element is really what is lacking in submission. And we see that over and over again, that there's essentially not this analysis, of the types of tensions that Steffen mentioned, or that we see just very limited engagement with ethics theory. So just to give some examples here, we continue to receive a very large number of submissions, studying, for instance, the impact of ESG or other types of issues on firm outcomes or firm financial outcomes. And that's certainly a very interesting line of inquiry, but ultimately it's not really engaging with deep ethical issues around, is it ethical what firms are doing? Are there any tensions here? What are the impacts on different stakeholder groups? It's essentially sort of just assuming because a firm does certain actions, engages in ESG, has high ESG scores, that this somehow equates to being ethical. And that's obviously a relationship that, where we would kind of like to see more debate, more engagement. So essentially, we would really like to see articles that explore the ethical relationships, between different types of stakeholders. That can be direct firm stakeholders, but certainly, also non-human stakeholders. So what's really important to us is to see this sort of critical engagement with ethics theories and concepts in the papers that we are getting. There are certainly some theories that are relatively well known and that we see used in many articles. For instance, around utilitarianism, morally right and wrong actions. There's an entire stream here of ethical philosophy behind this. Obviously, can't go into detail in the short section here. The ontology, virtue ethics. So there's no shortage here of different types of streams of literature that can inform, debates in organizations. Also, for instance, looking into duties, principles, what is right, what is wrong. But certainly also a lot of them are, as Steffen has already mentioned, they are Western-based theories. So we are also very mindful of that and obviously welcome non-Western approaches and non-Western discussions. So ultimately, looking at business ethics, we really are hoping to see those deep interrogations, moral dilemmas, choices, problems that companies are facing, right? What to prioritize, how to manage tensions, and so on. And certainly critical evaluations are really, really important to our section, and that can include multiple different dimensions, moral foundations of essentially operating principles, but I can also look at dimensions of justice, equality, inequality, right? Issues around equity, responsibility, and so on. But that link to theory is really important, and this critical engagement as well. I think that's really important for us as well. not just these assumptions that because companies are doing something to move themselves towards sustainability, that this is automatically resulting in ethical responses, because we see many examples where this is simply not the case. Might just move to the next slide, Steffen. So just a brief word here also on methodologies. We are very open to a diverse range of methodologies. So between the two of us, we are covering the entire spectrum of very qualitative to very quantitative. So we are definitely open to, submissions from all different methodologies. There are definitely no limitations in that regard. I'm an interdisciplinary researcher myself. Steffen has done a lot of interdisciplinary work. So we are very open and welcoming to these types of papers. Theory is important here, right? In particular, that link to ethics theory. And as I said on the previous slide as well, it's very important for us as well to see critical perspectives represented. Certainly, we're also very, very, very aware that a lot of the literature that we see at the moment is very much based on Western approaches. So we are very open to work as well that challenges these approaches and looks at creating decolonial spaces, looks at challenges around this, essentially reflecting a plurality of different voices, right? Looking at political types of issues, contexted contexts and whatnot. So there is a broad range here of different approaches that we are open to. Certainly, we like the unusual approach as well. We like to see unusual interrogations of business ethics issues. And certainly, and as Steffen already mentioned, there's also a lot to explore here in terms of different geographies, land-based issues, and so on. To the next slide. So just a few brief words about JBE. I won't go into much detail here, just to briefly give you a little bit of context. The editors-in-chief since January 2021, Ghazi Islam and Michelle Greenwood. So you might have already seen them on the website, but it is a very, very broad journal. So JBE is very broad across a large number of different sections. So we do have a lot of consulting editors and section editors across a wide range of disciplines. It's actually really fantastic because it allows us to edit a large number of different papers from different fields. Each subsection editor or each set of subsection editors is responsible to shape their own subsection. So it's definitely very important to make sure you are submitting your paper to the right section here as well. And as I already said, we are open to a wide range of different approaches. If we feel that a paper is not suited to our section, we might engage one of the other editors, so if you are accidentally submitting to the wrong section, it's not necessarily a fatal flaw for your document, but it just means that we are forwarding work to the most appropriate editor as well. Okay, next slide, please. So the journal has definitely grown in terms of its impact, as you can see here. I mean, the journal impact factor is obviously a very, incomplete metric here to use, but just to give you a bit of an idea where we are currently sitting. I mean, for us, what's really important is not just to produce an impact factor, but to produce work that has got impact in the field. So essentially all the typical submission criteria apply to us as well. The work must not have been published before, not under consideration elsewhere. Also very important, if your manuscript has been previously rejected, we are not typically inviting resubmissions. So there's only some cases where we might say, okay, this article has potential, but that would normally not be a rejection, but an invitation to work on that paper further before submitting it. We need approval from all your co-authors, and also very important that your publication has been approved by the responsible institutions here as well. So that's important to consider that as well. So how to submit? It's pretty straightforward. You go to our submission website. We've also got the link in the field below. So once you click on these particular sections here with submit your manuscript, there's a lot more guidance. My recommendation is definitely to engage with the editorials that have been put out in recent years, before submitting, because the submission process will ask you about your contributions to business ethics as well. And it really pays off to be familiar here with the work that's being completed in the field in order for you, to also make those comments throughout the submission process. Okay, next slide. So how to avoid being desk rejected? Probably one of the important questions why everyone is on the call here. So, I mean, unfortunately, I have to say, we receive way more manuscripts that we can ever publish. So it's probably also a sign of what's happening in academia. A lot of work is being produced. Everyone is trying to get it published. Our desk rejection rate is very high, 80 to 90%. And it's often because we get manuscripts that are simply not focusing on ethics as a core element. I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. So please make sure that your document really speaks to business ethics theory and not just a couple of citations. I recently had a submission that said, but we've cited that many articles from JBE, so we are making a great contribution to the journal. That's not the kind of ethics discussion that we are necessarily looking at. So just citing articles from the journal is not really meaning that you have that deep engagement with the business ethics literature. So we recommend that you look at recently accepted articles, also work in the subsection, just to get an idea of what's being published now. As I said, very important, the journal has changed direction in recent years. It started to focus more and more on business ethics. So you will see older submissions that are not necessarily, fulfilling the criteria that I'm mentioning here, but the journal has evolved. Steffen has already commented on that as well. And business ethics is now a really core part of what we need to see in submissions. So definitely engage with business ethics debates and also make sure that the work is targeted for this journal, right? It does have a very strong ethics flavor. So normally work that is sort of being prepared for other journals might not necessarily fit JBE automatically as a result of that. It can pay off to talk to a section editor, and that's what we're here for. So we are very happy to provide guidance. I often get this question of, what should I work on that gets published in JBE? So that's a very difficult question to answer, because the idea here is not that you start producing academic work for the sole purpose of getting published in a particular journal. What I like to see is people really having passion about their work and working on really important topics, and then looking for an outlet for those types of articles. And certainly we are also looking at proper copy editing, formatting, presentations, and so on. And again, right, this emphasis on theory, it's really important that we see that coming through. Okay, and we move to the next slide, and I'm handing back to Steffen actually for a discussion of one of our articles.
So thank you, Martina. I just wanted to very, very briefly give you an example of the type of work that we have edited. So this came out maybe 2 years ago. That was one of the first papers I edited for JBE in this section. It's a paper by Joanna Gervele, based on her PhD, based on resource extractive industries and struggles around place in her native Finland. This is just to give you a flavor of the type of work that we would welcome. This is clearly around engagements with the natural environment. It's about natural resource struggles, as it says in the title, as it were. We don't have time to read the whole abstract here, but I've just copied something from the introduction, right? So let's just read this very briefly. Gives you a flavor of the type of work that we're looking for and what is possible, and the tensions and the relationships we are interested in, right? So this paper offers new theorizations, and I copied this in particular because it talks to the new theory contribution that this paper is offering, right? And this is a paragraph from the introduction. This paper offers new theorization on how place identifications, attachments, and meanings are constituted, at the two levels of ecological and social place, forming place-basedness as a contingent relationship between the actor and place. The paper contributes to the literature on corporate community relations by explaining through the concept of place-basedness the different positionalities in those relations and the dynamics and different degrees of resistance in a place. This paper also offers new insights for the business ethics literature on social embeddedness by illustrating how social webs in local communities may constrain some resistance, right? So this paragraph is quite a mouthful, sounds quite theoretical, but it's based on a rich case study, essentially, and it's about relations of people and nature in a place, right? It's a place-based approach to understanding tensions in a place, right? So that's the kind of thing that we are doing. We, as Martina said, we are not just offering you a space for qualitative research, but for a whole range of different methodological approaches, including quantitative approaches and mixed methods, of course, as well. Back to you, Martina, to maybe finish us off before we then have a Q&A.
Yep. So if you would like to connect further and, receive updates, not just from our section, but from the journal more broadly, there are many opportunities here to connect via social media. So we've put up the different accounts that we do have available, right? So that might be if you wanted to just get updates from other articles that are published, there are plenty of opportunities here across the various social media platforms where you can find us. And definitely also make sure that you have a look at recently published articles, in particular in your area, before submitting to the journal, because that does give you very good insight, into the literature that's already there, foundations to build on, the debate to engage with. And also, I think it's also really important to see, in particular in recent years, how the journal has shifted its work towards more ethics-based theory in particular. All right, we've reached the end, and you can also connect with us. Our handles are here as well, and we are also across the various different social media platforms where we are posting about a range of things, not just the JBE related work. And if you've got any questions, now is our Q&A time, so we are very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So I suggest you either put your question or comment in the chat, or you raise your hand if you want to come in live to ask your question. So we've talked a lot. Over to you guys.
We've got one question in the chat. Have we got a plan for a special issue on these issues?
So there are specific special issue editors that are involved in JBE. Special issues tend to be reserved for issues, topics, approaches that are not covered by sections, right? So you would struggle to get a special issue proposal accepted by JBE, for example, generally on the relationship between business ethics and the environment, because that's what our section is about, right? So the special issue editors are looking for material that is not normally covered by already existing sections. I think that's the answer to this.
Okay, we've got another question. Rosina, I think you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and a very inspiring presentation. So my question is, thank you very much for the offer of reaching out to engage with you about papers. At what point in the development of the paper is the best time to do that? I'm asking because we're in kind of early draft of a paper that I think you'd be really interested in, but I just want to know the right time and the right way to have a discussion with you, because I'd really value that.
Look, I mean, I'm open to inquiries at all different stages, right? So you don't have to wait till the final product is ready for submission. Please feel free to approach us along the way. I mean, I'm mindful. I don't want to superimpose my own ideas onto papers, right? So the advice that I tend to give is a little bit more general in nature, because I really want to make sure that authors are developing their own ideas, right? But we can definitely point out ways to better engage with business ethics theory, other papers that have been published in that regard, just kind of ways to make your paper sort of more relevant in these kind of ways, right? So at any time that you feel is appropriate, please feel free to reach out. There's no particular point in time where I think it's necessarily the best idea, right? So
I'll take you up on it. Thanks, Martina.
Same here. This is, by the way, not possible in all journals. So I've been told in no uncertain terms by some editors elsewhere that basically I shouldn't talk to them before submission. So we are quite approachable, but of course there are limits to what we can say and do, right? I mean, you will have to do the hard work, but we are approachable people. We see this as a collegial process. And in the end, we are interested in receiving good submissions, right? Because the desk rejection rate is so high and we get so much, well, I was going to say a strong word, which I'm not going to say now, but we're getting not appropriate submissions. Disappointing, yeah, thank you. Disappointing work, which is not really targeted at our section or the journal, right? Because JBE appears on the FT50 list, right? So we are seen in some quarters as a very prestigious, high-ranking journal, which we are. But as a result, we're getting all sorts of stuff that just isn't targeted at the journal. So this is our biggest problem, and our biggest kind of free labor that we're doing is basically desk rejecting papers that should have never been submitted to JBE in the first place, right? So, and that's a wider systems problem here that should be reflected on as well, right? But so that's why we're interested in engaging with prospective authors to help shape good submissions, right? So that's why we're doing this work. We've got a hand up by Pushkar, and then also one or two questions in the chat. Pushkar, why don't you go first?
Thank you very much. My name is Pushkar and I am based in India. I am a PhD scholar. So my question is regarding a line in the slide which says that approval by the responsible authorities. So my question is regarding the consent from supposedly I am collecting data from a tribal people who are displaced due to the mining company, their intervention. So in these circumstances, it is very difficult to get consent from the tribal people who come from very marginalized section to get a written consent from them. So how to go about it? I think I was able to make my point.
Thank you, Pushkar. I mean, this is a very specific case which we can't go into detail now, but this just generally alerted us to obviously for all scholars, they have to go through their typical institutional ethical approval process, and each case is different. So we can't comment on your specific case, but there are particular ethical principles involved in doing research, which your home institution, your university, there will be a process that you have to follow there. So that process will be different in each institution, but we just wanted to generally alert everyone to saying, well, we obviously need to be assured that the material that is submitted to us has gone through an ethical approval process and ethical principles have been adhered to, and you've got a stamp of approval from your institution to basically say that this is good work and has gone through a process of approval. That's all we meant to say. Gwenola, and then we probably should have one or two questions from the chat. Gwenola, why don't you go first?
Thank you very much. It's really encouraging, first, to hear this broadening of perspective. And since you mentioned planetary boundaries and also social justice, I was wondering how open would Journal of Business Ethics be to cross-disciplinary co-authors from Earth System Science, for example, or, well, peace and conflict, or a science of education. So I come from science. I just want to say I come from science of management, but the fact that you're opening so officially, well, could create some more official collaboration in the research arena.
I mean, as I mentioned during, the talk, we're definitely very open to interdisciplinary approaches. I mean, the link that we would definitely like to see is around the ethics element, and given that it is a business journal, it would have to have some overlap in that regard as well. But obviously a broad definition, right? It doesn't just have to be company or firm or industry, right? It can be a broader set of stakeholders. It can be different types of approaches, different types of relationships that we see within our society, right? So as long as we see touch points there and good theoretical development around it, that we are definitely open to consider a broad range of work in those kind of spheres.
Thank you.
I'd like to second that. I very much agree with that, Martina. There was a question in the chat about whether we welcome theoretical submissions. So I take it that means sort of conceptual papers, i.e. not empirical-based papers. So yes, we do publish conceptual papers. Again, the advice would be have a look at what recently being published in a journal, right? It's a big journal, lots of papers being published. So have a look what the last 2 or 3 years of papers look like, and you will find a whole range of different paper types, right? So maybe this is actually a good opportunity to mention that we also publish, for example, commentaries, right? So that's a paper format that I've been eager to alert prospective authors to. So commentaries, and I've edited probably 3 or 4 commentaries over the last year or 2. So commentaries tend to be shorter papers. This format was originally sort of brought to life in JBE as a kind of inviting authors to comment on papers that have been published in the journal. So sort of a commentary on existing papers, response, if you like, to what's been published there before. We're in the process of broadening that category. So just recently, we published more general commentaries on specific topics. So they tend to be sort of shorter essays, 4,000 or 5,000 words long, can be even shorter. They can also be a bit longer. So they still need to have a theoretical contribution. They still need to have a contribution to the business ethics field, but they tend to be sort of less restricted to the sort of expectations of normal article, right? So I would say they're sort of maybe a little bit more playful, more essayistic, more kind of exploratory. So I think this paper format is particularly good if you want to write a sort of an essay or a manifesto on a particular kind of aspect, right? So it's a little bit more open, I would say. So I think consider that. But the original question about conceptual papers, yes, we do publish conceptual papers of various types, where essentially we don't have quantitative or qualitative data to draw on, but you develop a conceptual framework for understanding a particular phenomenon.
Yeah. Just to add a word here, I think on literature reviews, which might be an important one as well, we do receive a lot of them. And I have to say that in order to get a literature review published, it needs to offer a really deep interrogation of that topic that you are looking at, right? I mean, I think that we have seen an absolute proliferation of literature reviews, and I've certainly done some as well myself, right? But in order to really have a literature review that we would look at, it needs to go beyond just outlining publication trends. That we see so many papers that offer a whole range of different bibliographic kind of methods. These are the top published authors, these are the top papers, these are the top themes. What we kind of want to see is a literature review that is, if that's the type of format you want to get published, that really offers a deep interrogation of particular ethical issue, construct, concept, and offers really a theoretical contribution in addition to just outlining or essentially being a descriptive piece of work, right? So that would be very important to look at, because otherwise you'll get the standard desk reject letter that there is no real contribution to, the ethics literature, unfortunately. So if that's what you're planning on doing, I would just say, yes, we would definitely look at it. But also it's an area that is getting very crowded. So if you're trying to add here in terms of, reviewing literature, it would really need to be a piece that is taking us into a new direction, right? Or it's, illuminating a construct, a concept that where we haven't seen that sort of work published before. That would be very important to keep in mind.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Any more pressing questions? There's one in the chat. Is the focus only on the business context? Does the societal context also fit with the focus of the journal? Short answer is yes. I mean, business, of course, is part of society. We don't see kind of very, very stringent boundaries between business and society. But of course, the journal is called Journal of Business Ethics. So it is important that there's a link to business activities. But of course, business and society is closely intertwined. Do you publish on non-profit organizations? Of course, we do. Any more questions at all?
The business is definitely a broader construct here. It does not have to be a for-profit organization, right? It can definitely be organizations, institutions. We're happy to go in a broader sense. If you have work that is focusing on particular areas, you might potentially find that they're better suited for a different type of section. So for instance, if your paper is predominantly finance oriented, there is actually also a specific finance section within the journal. But, we've got so many different subsections, it really, pays off to sort of see where the best fit might be. And again, if you are unsure if we're the best fit for you, you can definitely reach out and clarify that as well. And of course, we can only give you a general assessment just because we are saying send it, then it needs to go through it needs to pass the review process as well. So we'll take those voices into consideration as well.
It might be useful while you're on the call now and you still have a few minutes left. Why don't you actually go to the JBE homepage, which I just posted on the chat. So if you click on that link now, and you just go and have a look at this journal. So this provides basically an overview of the different sections and basically briefly lists the editors, the section editors for each section, and a brief blurb on each section. And you will find that we have a brief blurb on the environment section as well. So that gives you a good idea of what each section editor has in mind for their section and what kind of work they're welcoming. So have a look through there. Okay.
You can also see the difference between our section there and corporate sustainability and business ethics, because we often do get questions, what's the better section to submit to? So when you have a careful look at the section that is, edited by our good colleagues, Corey and Kai, you will see in their description a much stronger focus on corporate governance structures, right? Sustainability reporting and so on, sustainability performance. So it does have a bit of a different flavor compared to what we are doing. And of course, you will have to make that judgment call where you think your work fits best. Again, if we see papers that might have accidentally ended up in the wrong section, we will make sure to transfer them for you. So it's not going to be an automatic desk reject because you found the wrong section, right? But it does help definitely to be aware of this, just to make sure that you're ending up in the right spot to begin with.
There's a question by a junior researcher, and we will probably come to an end soon now. But so if anybody needs to leave, please feel free to leave. But this question comes up again and again. What is actually constituting a contribution to theory? That's really, really important, not just for JBE, but other top journals, right? So you cannot get published in JBE if you don't offer a contribution to theory. Now, that can mean lots of different things, but essentially it means in the context of JBE, this means you have to contribute to existing debates, theoretical debates in the business ethics field, which is basically, where JBE is embedded in. So typically, an empirical contribution is not enough, right? To give you an example, right? So say stakeholder theory, CSR, and these kind of theories have been discussed for donkey's years. And to simply say, oh, we have a case study from Senegal about how land-based communities are engaging with carbon offsetting schemes. And we're discussing how this links to stakeholder, theory discussions, as it were, simply to say this is a new context, empirical context from Senegal that we are basically offering to the field, that is typically not enough, right? So you have to essentially say, what is your study adding to existing theoretical understandings in the field, right? So how does this challenge existing understandings? How does it take us forward in thinking about, for example, things like stakeholder theory, right? Stakeholder theory, I'm just using it as an example because obviously it's been one of the prominent debates and theoretical constructs used in this journal and in business ethics more general. I can't answer, and I'm sure Martina would be hard pressed to answer the question, what are the current hot theories in the field? I think you just have to read the papers that have recently been published in the journal. There are lots and lots of different theoretical constructs that are out there that you can contribute to. Essentially, each journal has certain debates that are going on, right? And JBE is also favoring certain debates that you essentially can engage with, right? And it's for you to basically select these debates and see what you can contribute to, which is not to say that we're just looking for some sort of hamster wheel contribution in the sense of we're just kind of talking again and again about CSR, again and again about a stakeholder theory. We do encourage novelty and new debates as well. But of course, you need to take your audience into account, right? Your readership is in the business ethics field, right? So you need to take them onto a journey, right? It wouldn't work introducing a new theoretical construct that business ethics scholars would really struggle to connect to. You need to take your audience onto a journey, right? And that's basically your task.
I think my final comment on that is also, especially when you do this type of work, please don't just construct a paper because you think this is a hot topic and this gets me published. I think it's really important that we do work that matters and that makes a difference, right? And the publication avenue should essentially just be one of the many avenues where we can communicate the impact of the work, right? But ultimately, I think just writing about what we perceive to be a hot topic is not a guarantee for success, right? It's more important to me to see work that makes a difference and then engages with literature. And just because sometimes we actually get an absolute surplus of papers when a particular hot topic is perceived to be trending, right? So no shortage of ChatGPT papers, for instance, right? So that can also be a pitfall in itself. So please do work that matters. That's the most important part.
Very, very good point, Martina. No, there's a question by I don't quite understand the question. So could you maybe tell us about your question, Amna, if you want to come in live, if you're still around.
Hi there. Hello, Amna here from Pakistan. I've recently completed my PhD from Massey University, New Zealand. I'm a qualitative researcher, and I have a question that when we try to align any organizational theory in sustainability or any sort of supply chain management, aspect with the empirical evidence or the participants' observation or the quotes. So what is the best phenomena to align the organization theory with the evidence, empirical evidence in qualitative research? How should we do this?
That's a big question.
That is a big question. I think we need another PDW on that one. I think my short answer to this is there's different approaches for doing this. But ultimately, what you would like to see is that the evidence that you've got illuminates the ethical issue that you are trying to interrogate, right? So that's probably the best way to answer that question in a brief sense. So let's assume you're talking about conflict of interest, right? So your interviews might show how people have dealt with conflicts of interest, and how is that creating ethical issues and dilemmas and moral problems. So that would be the sort of alignment ultimately that we'd be looking for, right? But that's a very brief answer to a very brief question. So there are definitely also different ways and different approaches from a qualitative point of view to do this. And I don't think we can cover all of them in detail because we're already very much over time. But I think I suggest as well, have a look at empirical qualitative papers in the journal, because that's a really good starting point as well.
Exactly. Have a look at existing, recently published, I emphasize recently published papers in JBE that will give you an idea of how to do that. But essentially, empirical, particularly qualitative data, can sometimes be overwhelming, right? So you've got so much data and so many possibilities of how to analyze this data, interpret the data, and you could typically, from your research, you can typically target your research at different journals and different audiences, right? So what we are asking you to do is to target, if you're interested in JBE and submitting to this journal, in our section, basically then analyze this data and write this paper with JBE and the business ethics field in mind, right? Because you can on the same research with the same qualitative data, you could do a very different analytical job that's targeted at a different audience, right? So that's the work you've got to do, and only you can do it because you're research best. So read in the journal, see what debates are going on, what are maybe make a list of 5 to 10 relevant papers that talk to your constructs, to your research questions, to your empirical field, and see what are the debates going on in these papers, and see how your empirical data can maybe challenge existing understandings or take these existing understandings forward, right? So that's how I would go about it. In qualitative research, you always have this challenge of, I've got tons of data, how do I make sense of it, right? But this making sense of it involves also at some stage to understand what existing understandings are in the field. So it's a kind of abductive process you have to engage in, right? So rather than just purely grounded research, purely letting your data speak, as it were, you at some stage need to understand what the existing field and your audience already understands, right? Otherwise, what's the point? So it's got to be a sort of a bit of a abductive process of understanding what the existing knowledge base looks like, and then bringing your empirical field in, while not forgetting about the originality of your specific case and your specific data. Anyway, there could be lots more talked about on that field, so we'll probably have to stop there. Any last burning questions before we log off?
And we'll definitely make the recording available as well, and so you will have access to this information as well afterwards. I think that's it for today. We've got no further questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope you found this informative, and hopefully we'll receive good submissions from you. Very much looking forward to that. And if you've got any further questions where to find us, we're definitely happy to help. And very much looking forward to hopefully seeing you again at some point and or to receiving your submission. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. Thank you.